open. Statements by members. Déclaration de députés. The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, last week I was in Warsaw. While there, I spoke with an Afghan refugee couple, he a journalist and she a teacher, as well as a female former Supreme Court justice, all priority targets for the Taliban. They were rescued from certain death and evacuated from Kabul by the Polish Air Force. Since August of 2021, Poland has provided them with money and housing. However, after 10 months of waiting to resettle in Canada, Poland has done all it can. That country needs to focus on the 3.6 million Ukrainians who have crossed its borders. Repeated efforts to obtain assistance from Canada's embassy in Poland, GAC, and IRCC have proven useless. What good is Canada's special immigration measures for Afghans if they don't work and only amount to, hey, here's a bunch of websites, don't expect any help? What a disgrace, Mr. Speaker. People's lives are at stake. Canada made a commitment. I call upon the government to honor our nation's word.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I recently joined the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Northern Affairs, my Manitoba colleagues, and Premier Heather Stephenson to greet 350 Ukrainians, adults, children, and their pets as they arrived in Winnipeg. We greeted them like family, which is not an exaggeration. More than 120,000 Manitobans are of Ukrainian descent, including members of my own family. Each of them received a warm Manitoba welcome. However, those moments of warm embrace were bittersweet. Thoughts of beloved family, friends, and homeland left behind were ever present. Vladimir Putin is solely to blame for the chaos, displacing millions of people and taking thousands of lives. He has waged an illegal war on a democratic nation and is terrorizing civilians and razing cities. Ukraine is a significant ally to NATO, and as a member of the alliance, Canada will continue to support its defense through humanitarian aid and military equipment for as long as necessary. Canada will always be a steadfast supporter of Ukraine and host its people with warmth, dignity, and respect.
The Honourable Member for Barrie Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Mr. Speaker, today I am especially proud to rise in recognition of two outstanding leaders in Barrie Springwater, Oro-Medonte, who will be starting their much-deserved retirement soon. Janice Scott led the Royal Victoria Regional Health Centre for 17 years as President and CEO. She has had an oversized role in making the RVH a regional leader in healthcare in Simcoe County, and she has led an exceptional team that guided our healthcare community throughout many challenging times. Dr. Meriden Westmoynes has served as the President and CEO of Georgian College for the better part of 10 years. In her time, she has led the growth of an educational institute that attracts talented students and staff from across Ontario and the world. Students that settle in Barrie, stimulate our economy, and enrich our community.
That's right.
I want to wish Ms. Scott and Ms. Westmoynes the very best in their much-deserved retirement. I would also like to welcome the new CEO and Presidents, Gail Hunt for RVH and Kevin Weaver for Georgian College. I know that Barrie Springwater Oro-Medonte's future is bright with such talented, competent people in important leadership roles.
Hear, hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is with a heavy heart that I rise today in memory of a great man, Maulana Naseem Mahdi Sahib, a dear friend of mine for over 30 years. He left this world last week. Naseem was a loyal and trusting friend that I, my husband Sam, and the rest of our family are honored to have known. He was born in Pakistan, arriving in Canada in May 1985 as head of the Canada Jamaat, as well as serving in many other countries. I first met him in Toronto, where he was already a well-respected and loving Mubali. He impacted thousands of families and has left quite the footprint through things such as the Batul Islam Mosque, Peace Village, and the Amity Abode of Peace. He was a champion of interfaith harmony. Naseem believed that at the core of everything was love and peace, and that working together we could achieve this for the world. He didn't believe in just coexisting. He believed in existing as one. I will never forget the work he has done, the love he has shown, and the many things he has done for all of us as Canadians. Nassim, your legacy of love and community remains, and I thank you for sharing it with me and every other person that was blessed enough to have encountered you. Rest in peace, dear friend, until we meet again.
Honorable.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1672, Intendant Talon conceded the seigneurie of Verchères to an officer of the Carignan-Salière Regiment, François Jarret. This little village on the St. Lawrence was in the front row of history when Madeleine, who was only 14 years old, heroically protected the village from an Iroquois attack. Some even say that she saved New France. Years later, a patriot from Verchères, Luger Duvernay, founded the Saint Jean-Baptiste Society, which organized the first celebrations of Quebec's national holiday. To that heritage, we can add National Patriots' Day, which we owe to another native of Verchères, former Premier Bernard Landry. When we think of Verchères, we also think of its famous flat-bottomed boats and of the incredible artisans who work hard to keep the knowledge of their predecessors alive. In 2022, Verchères is a marvelous village that you can't help but fall in love with. And that's why I want to wish everyone in and from Verchères a marvelous 350th anniversary.
L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Argenteuil-La Petite Nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is World Milk Day. It's an opportunity to thank our dairy farmers, processors, and producers who work hard to provide delicious milk for our country. Every day, our farmers jump out of bed to provide healthy, high-quality dairy products. These products are created carefully, safely, and in an environmentally friendly way, and more environmentally friendly, Mr. Speaker. The Canadian dairy industry is known around the world for its high quality. Dairy products are an important part of a healthy diet, and they're a pillar of our economy. The industry is a major force in our rural municipalities, like mine, and it contributes to dynamic land use practices. We are proud of the quality of our dairy industry and also of its environmental innovation. Our dairy sector is a world leader, and we will always celebrate the hard work of our farmers, producers, and processors. To each and every one of you, happy World Milk Day.
L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in honor of World Milk Day, which is celebrated every year on June 1st. To the 10,000 dairy farmers and over 500 processors in Canada, I say thank you. These incredible men and women get up before the sun every day, step into their work boots, and do the important work of feeding Canadians with our celebrated top-quality dairy products. In my riding, there are many dairy businesses who, day in and day out, produce some of the healthiest and most nutritious dairy products in the world. These farmers not only provide the best dairy products in the world, they also play an important role in helping our country meet its environmental goals. On behalf of all parliamentarians, thank you for your hard work. We will continue to support the agricultural sector, which is the economic powerhouse that will get our economy going again. On World Milk Day, I invite all of my colleagues to raise a glass of milk in honor of the hard-working Canadians of our dairy industry.
The Honourable Member for Mississauga, Streetsville.
Hi, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back. I'm excited to rise in the House today to kick off Filipino Heritage Month for the month of June. I would like to thank my colleague from Scarborough Centre and every MP in the House who supported Motion 155 to make this happen. From coast to coast to coast, Filipino Canadians will be celebrating this June by having flag-raising ceremonies, Independence Day festivals, and celebrations throughout the month. From the original settlers in Westminster, BC 130 years ago to the now 1 million Filipinos across Canada today, I want to acknowledge the tremendous contributions of Filipino Canadians in making their mark in Canada. I'd like to say a special thank you to my husband, Chris, my kids, Kyle and Cassidy, my mother and father-in-law, and the Filipino interns for joining us in Ottawa today. Maraming salamat, maligayang buwan ng pamanang Filipino. Thank you very much and happy Filipino Heritage Month. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Jean Martin Indigenous History Month. My constituents, including Ann Hines, the minister of Roncesvalles United Church, care deeply about understanding Indigenous contributions to our community. So when Ann considered what her congregation could do to support Indigenous reconciliation, she looked no further than Phil Cote. Phil belongs to the Moose Deer Point First Nation and is a celebrated Anishinaabe artist, and commissioned him to create a soaring Indigenous mural, some 60 feet high and 70 feet wide, that now adorns an entire wall of the church. The mural is the first of its kind in a church in Canada. The significance is clear, Mr. Speaker, given the historic role of the church in administering the residential school system. Now, all those who enter Roncesvalles United are struck by this towering work of art and the creation story it depicts. As opposed to working to take the Indian out of the child, Roncesvalles United is now celebrating the Indigenous presence that surrounds all of us. The path toward reconciliation is a shared one. Thank you, Phil Cote and Ann Hines, for demonstrating that for all of us. Chimigwech. Sure.
The Honourable Member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, Pitt Meadows is one of the prettiest spots on our planet and a wonderful place to raise a family. It's on the traditional land of the Katzie and nestled between the Coast Mountains and the Pitt and Fraser Rivers. It has a small town feel even though it's in Metro Vancouver. Residents enjoy chatting or strolling along the dikes, perhaps after grabbing a coffee at the Stomping Grounds Cafe or an ice cream from the Sweet Tooth Creamery. Looking for a wonderful place to golf or to get married? Nowhere better than Swanisett, not far from Pitt Lake, the largest freshwater tidal lake in the world, and where you can view eagles, swans, herons, and seals. Business is booming. This month, a new airport terminal is opening, as well as a Vancouver aviation school. This Saturday, residents will line up by the thousands for the Pitt Meadows annual parade, the 81st. It's a great time to connect, and it'll be a blast. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, happy Italian Heritage Month, a time to recognize, celebrate and honour the immeasurable contributions of Italian Canadians while showcasing the rich Italian culture, heritage and gastronomy. Le relazioni diplomatiche fra il Canada e l'Italia si sono rafforzate nel corso degli ultimi 75 anni, ma i nostri legami interpersonali uniscono le nostre nazioni da molto più tempo. La nostra storia condivisa è costruita sul viaggio di una donna italiana coraggiosa, forte e valorosa. As documented by the Quiet Immigration Project titled Le Femmine Forti, a tribute to the brave Italian women who immigrated to Canada after World War II, and through sheer strength of character, with neither fanfare nor complaint, wove their way into Canada's social fabric. These are our nonnas, our mothers and wives, and yes, Mr. Speaker, our daughters, including mine, Eliana, Natalia, and Leah, who will carry the rich Italian-Canadian legacy for years to come. Grazie con tutto il cuore. This Italian Heritage Month, join me in sharing and celebrating the stories of these brave Italian women. Buon mese del patrimonio italiano, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Jury service often comes at a considerable sacrifice. Many jurors go through difficult trials and are exposed to horrific evidence, and yet they're unable to talk about what is often the most stressful aspect of jury service, the deliberation process, due to the jury secrecy rule. Yesterday, the Justice Committee voted unanimously to send Bill S-206, of which I'm the House of Commons sponsor, back to the House for third reading. The bill carves out a narrow exception to the jury secrecy rule so that former jurors can disclose all aspects of their jury service with a medical professional bound by confidentiality so that former jurors can get the help that they deserve. Jurors play an indispensable role in the administration of justice. We owe it to them to see that this bill finally crosses the finish line and is passed into law.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, despite the many flaws in Bill C-11, the Liberals continue to force this legislation through Parliament. Last week, the CEO of Canada's most successful YouTube channel told the Heritage Committee that Bill C-11 is not an ill-intentioned piece of legislation, but it is a bad piece of legislation. It's been written by those who do not understand the industry that they're attempting to regulate. Mr. Speaker, artists and creators who work in the digital media have been clear. Modernization does not mean taking an outdated 30-year-old regulatory system and simply applying it to today's technology. While the Liberals claim there is now an exemption for user-generated content, This legislation clearly allows the CRTC to regulate any content that generates revenue directly or indirectly. That means that virtually all content can be regulated by the CRTC. Mr. Speaker, it's clear. Bill C-11 is flawed and it must be scrapped.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we celebrate National Accessibility Week in Canada, I would like to highlight the contribution of an exceptional woman. She is an immigrant who has dedicated over 35 years of her life to developing respite services for the families of children with intellectual disabilities. She has mobilized parents, created communities of support, and obtained the support of financial backers and elected officials at every level of government. This woman's name is Maritza Ferrada Videla, and she is my mother. Her leadership in supporting inclusion for the families of children with disabilities is exemplary. It is with considerable emotion and pride that I salute her courage, her determination, and her resilience in her fight for human dignity. And today, I wish her a well-deserved happy retirement. Mama, every day you have been and will continue to be a source of inspiration and quiet strength to me as I work in this house. In closing, I wish to thank all those who, like my mother, work to build a more inclusive and equitable society.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, June 2nd is International Sex Worker Day, a day to celebrate sex workers, to honor their work, and to push for better working conditions. Women, men, queer, trans, and non-binary sex workers are workers. They are members of our community, and they deserve dignity and respect, not stigma. Stigma leads to barriers accessing health care, to isolation, and to dangerous working conditions. Our laws, while claiming to protect sex workers, actually cause more harm by making it harder to report violence and harder to screen potential clients. We need to end stigma, to listen to the voices of sex workers who are calling for decriminalization, calling on MPs to stop conflating sex work with human trafficking, because it makes it harder to keep people safe. Instead, let's support the sex work community. One amazing organization is Peers Victoria Resource Society, an organization by sex workers for sex workers. On June 2nd, let's celebrate sex workers and end the stigma. Sex work is work.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, today, June 1st, we celebrate World Milk Day. Once again this year, I wish to highlight the contribution of our dairy producers who take care of their herds and who put high-quality milk in our fridges, along with important dairy products like butter, yogurt, and cheese. Today, milk has been delivered to the House lobby, and it's an opportunity for us to raise our glasses to the good health of our dairy producers. And we're happy to do so, Mr. Speaker, because milk and dairy products are healthy and nutritious. Dairy producers and other supply-managed sectors have done better than most through the pandemic. It's further proof that the system works and that we need to rapidly pass version 2.0 of our bill to protect supply management from any new breach during future free trade agreement negotiations. Long live our homegrown dairy producers.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, I recently traveled to Israel on a parliamentary mission to learn about the conflict, but something else that really stood out to me was how the country has moved on from COVID. It was immediately noticeable when we got off the plane: no mask, no public health warnings, distancing, or divisive vaccine mandates. In Israel, people are living joyously in a post-COVID world, Mr. Speaker, but as soon as we boarded the flight home to Canada, all COVID restrictions and mandates returned, and I felt the anxiety and stress of the past 2 years and realized the terrible impact Canadian restrictions continue to have on our psyches and how desperately people need a return to normal. But this Liberal government will not allow it. They voted against our motion to end travel restrictions and mandates, even though other highly advanced vaccinated countries with leading scientific and medical experts have done so. Mr. Speaker, it doesn't have to be this way. All Canadians can live freely once again. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's time Canada moves on too.
The honourable member for Lac St. Louis.
The City of St. Anne de Bellevue and my riding of Lac St. Louis is for the birds, Mr. Speaker. St. Anne's is the proud recipient of Nature Canada's bird-friendly city designation, only the 13th city in Canada to qualify. This designation is the result of the city's long-standing commitment to conserving and enhancing its natural environment with our feathered friends top of mind.
The bird-friendly policies and measures implemented by the city and its partners over the years include stopping the use of harmful pesticides and rodenticides, protecting biodiversity, protecting key habitats, and mobilizing local citizens through education and awareness-raising campaigns.
Congratulations to Mayor Paulahawa, Councillor Ryan Young, who has long spearheaded bird-friendly initiatives, and to the McGill Bird Observatory and Morgan Arboretum on making it possible for St. Anne's to obtain this well-deserved honor and recognition.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Have failed when it comes to making life more affordable for Canadians. Canadians are worse off today than they were 6 years ago, with out-of-control gas, grocery, rent, and housing costs. And what does this Prime Minister do? Nothing, except blame everyone else. Inflation is the fault of COVID, and high gas prices, he blames Putin. That's a cop-out, Mr. Speaker. So what is this Liberal government going to do to reduce the price of things like fuel and groceries? And when are they finally going to do it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the member opposite talks about 6 years ago. One of the very first things we did when we got into office was lower taxes for the middle class, by raising them on the wealthiest 1%. We then moved forward with a Canada Child benefit that delivers hundreds of dollars a month to Canadians, tax-free, while not sending checks to millionaire families like the Conservatives did before us. Mr. Speaker, we have now indexed to inflation that Canada Child benefit. So as of next month, that will raise for families across the country to help them keep up with the cost of living as we continue to invest in supports for families.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Newsflash for the Prime Minister, Canadians cannot keep up with the cost of living. They desperately need a break on these high costs. Now, while some provinces are taking action to relieve the pressure on Canadians, the Liberals are actually cheering on high gas prices and raking in the extra cash. On top of tax increases that came on April 1st, we're now seeing interest rates rise, which will cost Canadians more. But this Prime Minister continues to deny the reality. Why won't he take some responsibility and do something to reduce the cost of food, gas, and housing?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, this government has had Canadians' backs and will continue to have their backs through these difficult times. We know we're continuing to lower Canadians' cell phone bills. We did that by 25% as promised. We committed to working with provinces and territories to cut childcare fees in half this year. Families are already seeing real savings as a result. We committed to raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, and it increased again on April 1st. Also, by delivering an enhanced Canada Worker benefit, more families will benefit from that support. We will continue to be there to support families across the country.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the reality is the cost of everything is going up, and the Prime Minister seems to be in denial about it. But you know what else is going up under these Liberals? Violent crimes. That's because they are soft on crime. Their soft on crime approach means that places like Winnipeg, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal are becoming more dangerous, with violent crimes increasing under their watch. Criminals who terrorize vulnerable communities shouldn't get just a slap on the wrist and house arrest or bail. They should be behind bars. Why won't this Prime Minister start standing up for victims, do something to protect the innocent, and make sure that violent criminals are put in jail and stay in jail?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, what our communities need is a justice system that punishes criminals. What we don't need is a system that targets racialized people because of systemic discrimination. Our reforms turned the page on failed Conservative Party policies, which contributed to the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous people in our criminal justice system. At the same time, through our new legislation, we're increasing maximum penalties from 10 to 14 years for firearms-related offences, including smuggling and trafficking. We are there to support Canadians and to keep Canadians safe.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the press lines that the Prime Minister repeats provide a minimum of information but show a lack of compassion, both for victims of violent crime and Canadians who are paying more and more for everything to satisfy his insatiable need to spend. The Prime Minister allows Canadians to pay millions more in taxes every day because everything is costing a great deal more. Why is the Prime Minister refusing to accept his responsibilities, lower taxes for Canadians, to give them a break and some time to breathe? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. It would be a little bit more credible from the Conservatives if they hadn't voted against our very first initiative to lower taxes for the middle class and increase them for the more wealthier members of society. We have continued to provide a Canada Child benefit to help families with hundreds of dollars every month, and that will increase and is indexed to inflation and the cost of living. We are here to support Canadians and individuals. So we are helping the middle class in real ways, while the Conservatives only criticize and make partisan attacks. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, what is partisan about asking this government to take some time to reflect at the difficulties that Canadian families are facing in making ends meet? It's now that Canadians need help, Mr. Speaker, not in 6 months, not in a year. It's right now that the Prime Minister should take action, but they didn't even see it coming. They had nothing in the last budget to help Canadian families get through the recession that's coming. Once again, a third increase in inflation today. What will the Prime Minister do instead of just throwing out empty words? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, concretely, because of investments that this government is making, families across the country will see thousands of dollars in lowered daycare fees in Quebec, an increase in the number of spaces because of the federal government's investments. We will continue to be there to invest and help families. The Canada Child benefit is increasing and is tied to the cost of living. This means more money in the pockets of families that need it every month, Mr. Speaker. We are continuing to be there to support Canadians that are dealing with difficult times because of the war in Ukraine and the coming out of the pandemic. The honourable member for La Prairie, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Prime Minister stated that he wants to challenge Quebec's legislation on the secular nature of the state, giving the broad implications for all Canadians across this country. There are no implications for Canadians. It's nothing to do with that. It only concerns Quebecers. The law on secularization is a request from Quebecers, a law that was voted on by the members of the National Assembly of Quebec. It applies only in Quebec. I think it's clear, isn't it? Canadians have nothing to do with it, and it's none of their business. What is so hard for the Prime Minister to understand about that? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm certain that I didn't hear properly. I'm certain that the honourable member didn't want to suggest that all those who disagree and who challenge this before the courts in Quebec are not real Quebecers, Mr. Speaker. We will always be there with anyone across the country who wants to defend their fundamental rights protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And if, in fact, it winds up in the Supreme Court, yes, the federal government will be there to defend the rights of minorities as we do every day, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for La Prairie, Mr. Speaker, Quebecers want to strengthen the secularism of Quebec at home. It's their business. They don't tell Canadians what to do in their homes. If the citizens of Moose Jaw and Saskatchewan want their state and religion to go hand in hand, that's not our problem. They can get "In God We Trust" tattooed on their foreheads if they want. It's not our problem. We don't care. But in our nation, we want the secularity of the state, and we voted for it. Why would Quebecers accept that Canadians force religion back into our state? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I must tell the honourable member that his at home is also my home. I'm a Quebecer, and I am right to ensure that all Quebecers can have the same rights as everybody else across the country. The government's role is to ensure that all Canadians across the country have their rights supported and protected. And yes, if this winds up in the Supreme Court, we will be there to ensure that we protect the fundamental rights of everyone, Quebecers and Canadians.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Since 2016, 27,000 Canadians have lost their life to a toxic drug supply. Experts agree that a criminal approach will not save lives, and we need a healthcare-based approach. Now, the Prime Minister has agreed to take a healthcare-based approach by decriminalizing personal possession in BC. But if that approach is good in BC, why won't the Prime Minister support our bill to bring a healthcare approach for the rest of Canada to save lives across our country?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, to take a healthcare approach across the country, which is exactly the approach one needs to take, one needs to work with the people who actually direct the healthcare in every different province. And that means working with provinces. It means working with municipalities. It means working with frontline workers. And that's exactly what we've done in moving forward with BC responsibly to make sure there is a framework around it. Unfortunately, it is not a simple solution like proposed by the NDP. It is a complex solution that actually goes at the heart of the problem that we are moving forward on, and that, Mr. Speaker, is the right way to keep Canadians safe.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Since 2016, 25,000 Canadians across the country have died as a result of toxic drugs. So we're talking about 25,000 individuals. We know that we can't take the same approach and get a different result. We need to take an approach that will help people. The Prime Minister changed the approach for British Columbia. If it's good for British Columbia, why isn't it good for the rest of the country? Why isn't it good for Montreal, for example? Why is the Prime Minister not supporting our bill to save lives? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in fact, we made the choice to work with the province of British Columbia and the municipalities, and this to go forward with a science-based, evidence-based approach. But we cannot simply, with a decree of the Canadian Parliament, move into other areas of the country without working in partnership and working together with local jurisdictions. It's not a responsible approach that they're proposing. Responsible leadership means working with our partners to move forward as we're doing in British Columbia. And yes, we are open to do it elsewhere, but we need the partnerships to do so.
For Fundy Royal.
Mr. Speaker, 3 RCMP officers killed in Moncton, 6 worshippers killed inside a Quebec City mosque, 2 grandparents and their grandson murdered in Calgary in 2017. Their killers were given jail sentences of 40 years or more, but the Supreme Court has now capped sentences for mass murderers at 25 years. The Prime Minister likes to say that he has Canadians' backs. Will he stand up for the families of these victims?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are with the families and survivors of the hate-filled Islamophobic attacks at the Quebec City Mosque and the other killings across the country. At the Supreme Court, we argued in support of a sentencing judge's discretion to impose a longer period of parole ineligibility where appropriate. We know this court's decision was painful for many. We want to be clear. Nothing in the decision changes the fact that all people convicted of murder receive a mandatory life sentence. Just as we did in January 2017, we will stand with the families, survivors, and community, and everyone impacted by such violence.
Member for Fundy Royal.
Thoughts are not enough. This decision means that the person who killed 3 RCMP officers in Moncton will now be eligible for full parole at age 49. The Supreme Court ruling hands this issue back to Parliament for this Parliament, this government, to do something about it. Will this government, will this Prime Minister act to ensure that families won't have to go through the re-traumatization every 2 years of parole hearings to ensure that their loved one's killer remains behind bars?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, allow me to be clear once again. Nothing in the Supreme Court decision changes the fact that all people convicted of murder receive a mandatory life sentence. At the Supreme Court, we argued in support of a sentencing judge's discretion to impose a longer period of parole ineligibility where appropriate, but we will continue to stand with Canadians. We will continue to stand with victims and survivors of these terrible killings.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
The Supreme Court of Canada's ruling on consecutive parole sentences takes the side of serial killers and mass murderers instead of victims. What is cruel and unusual punishment is individuals losing their innocent loved ones to heinous crimes and then having to sit through years of detailed parole hearings, only adding to the trauma. Why isn't the Prime Minister taking the necessary steps to ensure victims are put first?
Honourable Prime Minister.
What we are also doing is taking the necessary steps to make sure there are fewer victims of mass killings by, for example, banning military-style assault weapons in this country, something conservative politicians continue to stand against. They want to make those guns used at Polytechnique, those guns used in other mass killings legal again, which we will continue to stand against. Not only that, we're now moving forward on an initiative that will make it illegal to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
That's disinformation, and the Prime Minister knows that they were already banned in the 70s. Those with consecutive sentences have only committed the most horrifying of crimes, and yet the Supreme Court wants these criminals to have the opportunity to be in society again. Canada's worst criminals should be locked behind bars and not free to walk the streets. So when will the Prime Minister start standing with victims and commit to ensuring that criminals serve sentences that reflect the severity of their crimes?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Question, Mr. Speaker, is when will the Conservative Party stop standing with the NRA and start standing with Canadians so there are fewer victims of violent crimes, fewer victims of mass murders? That's why we are moving forward. We moved forward with a ban on military-style assault weapons in this country. It is now illegal to buy, sell, or use a military-style assault weapon in this country. And on top of that, we're moving forward to make it illegal to buy, sell, or import handguns anywhere in this country. The Conservative Party stands against that. Canadians should ask them why.
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Section 33(1) of the Criminal Code states that the offence of extreme intoxication is not available when an act includes an assault. But just recently, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that Section 33(1) of the Criminal Code violates Section 7 and 11 of the Charter of Rights. Mr. Speaker, what part of this protects victims?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
This government is unwavering in our commitment to ensure that our criminal justice system keeps communities safe, respects victims, holds offenders to account, all while upholding charter rights. We're carefully reviewing the decision to determine its effect on victims as well as the criminal law. We've taken action to strengthen sexual assault laws to ensure that victims are treated with the utmost respect and are protected. It's critical to fostering greater confidence of survivors of sexual assault and gender-based violence, as well as the broader Canadian public in our justice system.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, time is not on victims' sides right now, so hopefully you hurry up. Mr. Speaker, because of the Supreme Court ruling allowing the defence of extreme intoxication, women have shared their fears about coming forward to local agencies and advocates. We are hearing from young women who are concerned about this decision, who are asking, is this really possible? Mr. Speaker, it is. There needs to be action. There needs to be resolutions. Victims' voices have been lost. When would this Prime Minister do something about it and fix this?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we have been acting on strengthening our criminal system's response to sexual assault for years now. We passed legislation which requires judges to obtain the necessary training to understand the complex nature of sexual assault and the myths that all too often surround it.
Just going to have to interrupt the Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'm trying to hear the answer, and I'm sure the Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London wants to hear her answer as well. So I'm going to ask everyone to tone it down a bit. There's a couple of you out there who have very strong voices, and I admire them. But please try to refrain them while somebody else is speaking. The Right Honourable Prime Minister, right from the top, please.
Again, we have and will consistently act to support survivors of sexual assault and make sure that the justice system responds to them better. We passed legislation which requires judges to obtain the necessary training to understand the complex nature of sexual assault and the myths that too often surround them. Budget 2021 included $85.3 million over 5 years to ensure access to free legal advice and legal representation for survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence. We've also made over $12 million in funding available through the Victims Fund for projects designed to improve the criminal justice system's response to sexual assault against adults, and there's more to do.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, not only does the Prime Minister want to challenge Quebec's Bill 21, the Liberals even want to use the case to put Quebec under trusteeship. Indeed, his colleague from Montreal declared on Friday that the notwithstanding clause needs to be abolished. I quote, "This article has no place in our charter and should never be used." So he wants to take away from Quebec its only constitutional recourse to protect our societal choices against the dictates of the federal government or federally appointed judges. Will the Prime Minister correct him and remind him that the notwithstanding clause is important? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for everybody to remember that when a legislative assembly, a parliament, chooses to suspend the fundamental rights of some of its citizens, it takes reflection. We all know Quebecers, like all Canadians, want their basic protections under the Charter to be upheld. When a government chooses to ignore those fundamental protections, it's important to reflect, and that's exactly what we're doing. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, the notwithstanding clause exists in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms precisely for cases like Bill 21. It's precisely to prevent Canadian institutions from unilaterally overturning the democratic choices of Quebec and the provinces. It's precisely to avoid this Prime Minister from countering Bill 21 to impose his own vision of state secularism, the vision of some guy who thinks we need to pray every day in Parliament. Will the Prime Minister leave the notwithstanding clause alone, or does he want to put Quebec under trusteeship? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Bloc is prepared to attack our fundamental freedoms of conscience in this country, but I know that the federal government will be here to defend fundamental freedoms, gender equality, protection of minorities, official language minorities across the country. We will always be there to ensure that all Canadians, be they in Quebec or elsewhere in the country, are protected in their fundamental rights and freedoms. That's what Canadians expect of this government.
Kildonan and St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, gun violence has gone up significantly over the past 7 years of Liberal government. That is fact. It is also a fact that most guns used in violent crime are smuggled in from the United States. Gun smugglers and gun traffickers are responsible for the murder of innocent Canadians in our cities like Toronto, Montreal, Regina, Edmonton. But why is the Liberal Prime Minister removing mandatory jail time for people who smuggle guns into Canada under Bill C-5? Why is he letting them off the hook, Mr. Speaker?
Great question. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we're actually increasing the penalties from 10 to 15 to 14 years for illegal smuggling of guns. But the concern that the Conservative Party seems to have around guns gives me hope that perhaps finally they will agree to support our ban on military-style assault weapons. Perhaps they will actually support putting a freeze on the importation, transfer, sale, or purchase of handguns in this country. It's great to hear the Conservatives concerned about gun violence. Now maybe they'll step up and strengthen gun control instead of weakening it.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Speaker, the reality is the Prime Minister's Bill C-5 will severely threaten the safety of families, children, mothers, and vulnerable communities because Bill C-5 allows criminals to commit serious and deadly gun crimes to serve house arrest rather than go to jail, meaning these dangerous criminals will be kept in the communities they have terrorized, which will disproportionately impact Black and Indigenous communities. It is sick, Mr. Speaker. Why is the Prime Minister prioritizing dangerous criminals with guns over the safety of our communities?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Of course, we are doing no such thing. We are looking at the systemic discrimination and racism that exists in our justice system that unfairly, particularly under the previous Conservative government's tough-on-crime approach, unfairly penalizes Black and Indigenous Canadians. This is why we will continue to move forward in responsible ways to make sure that criminals are punished, that penalties are brought in, that our communities are kept safe, including by preventing more Canadians from becoming victims of gun violence by strengthening gun control. Why won't the Conservatives stand with us on that?
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Annie Sampson, former Vice Chair of the City of Montreal's Executive Committee responsible for public safety, said, there is concern for the fate of criminals in prison, whereas at the same time there are hundreds of families that are mourning the loss of a loved one. Even if the provinces invest huge amounts of monies in fighting gun crime, these investments will be in vain if the Liberals follow a reckless strategy. By passing Bill C-5, there will be an increase in violence in Canadian communities. Will the Prime Minister accept that responsibility? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. We're improving the justice system to ensure that there is less discrimination and a systemic racism against Indigenous communities and Black Canadians. We will continue to ensure that there are fewer victims of violence by ensuring better gun control. I cannot believe that the members from Quebec in the Conservative Party are still standing up for less gun restrictions and to stop our attempt to restrict handguns or assault-style weapons. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is trying to play both sides. He's talking about C-21, C-5, but what's clear is that a Quebecer, Ms. Annie Sampson, testified that a criminal who uses an illegal weapon, no matter their ethnic origin, remains a criminal. It's incomprehensible to let criminals use guns to kill without having to worry about facing the same consequences as other criminals. For his part, the Prime Minister, with the complicity of the Bloc and the NDP, prefers to play petty politics at the expense of the safety of Canadian communities. Does the Prime Minister realize the negative consequences of C-5? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the legislative measures in C-5 do not prevent police officers from laying charges or prosecutors from getting convictions. What it does is to ensure that criminals are harshly punished while decreasing the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous Canadians in the criminal justice system. And I can tell you, because I know Annie Sampson very well, the former mayor of my region in Montreal, is very concerned about the fate of young Indigenous and Black people who are unfairly within our criminal justice system.
Avant de continuer, je veux...
Before we continue, I would like to remind the members in the front rows that when they speak, the microphone of the Prime Minister microphone also picks up what they say. So I know they're not doing it on purpose. However, I would just want to tell them that they are interrupting how this operates here in the House.
Or London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, 2 days ago, the Justice Arbour report came out, and the Liberals are already failing to take it seriously. Today's news that this government will bring back Canada's top military police officer, despite being asked to apologize for his mishandling of a sexual assault case, is appalling. We have heard over and over again that there needs to be culture change in Canada's armed forces. This isn't it. For 7 years, the Prime Minister has protected toxic men in positions of power. When will this feminist Prime Minister finally do what's right for women?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking Madam Justice Louise Arbour for her extraordinary work and for her excellent report, which we accept. We know the transformational change is necessary for our defence institutions, and we're taking steps to build a military and defence team where everyone feels safe, protected, and respected. We've accepted the report, and work is already underway on a number of her recommendations. We are committed to completing this important work for the sake of all the women and men who choose to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, who deserve forces that are up to the level that they demand.
Member for Elmwood to Transcona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, culture change is going to take much better answers coming from the top than that. Now, Canadians certainly didn't cause inflation, but they're paying for it. They're paying for it at the grocery store. Now they're paying for it with another interest rate hike by the Bank of Canada. And while there are things that are outside the government's control, there are things that they can do. Even Boris Johnson has seen fit to bring in a windfall tax on oil and gas companies making a ton of money on the backs of people during this period of inflation. That's money this government could use to double the GST credit, to raise the Canada Child Benefit by $500. So will the Prime Minister get up and to commit to these things instead of talking about what he did in 2016?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we continue to move forward on supports for families, supports for Canadians, including during this difficult time where the war on Ukraine and the supply chain disruptions caused by this pandemic are contributing to global inflation that Canadians are feeling. As people are struggling with the cost of groceries, as people are struggling with the cost of gas, they know, I spoke with a number of families in Saskatoon just last week who thanked me for the fact that the numbers, the amounts they're paying for childcare have significantly dropped already, more than enough to compensate for some of the extra charges. We're delivering supports for families across the country. We will continue to be there for Canadians every step of the way.
The Honourable Member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, we know that a dangerous situation can quickly turn deadly when a firearm is present. Canadians deserve to feel safe from gun violence. Unfortunately, Conservative politicians are more focused on fulfilling their promises to the gun lobby than actually keeping our community safe. On our side, I know we are taking real action to tackle this issue. Can the Prime Minister update this House of the concrete step this government is taking to protect Canadians from gun violence?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I want to thank the member for Brampton South for her hard work and for advocacy in her community. This week, we presented the most ambitious move to strengthen gun control in a generation and introduced many provisions to protect our society's most vulnerable, like allowing judges to protect the identity of those who raise a flag, by giving law enforcement more tools to intercept guns from coming over our borders and off our streets. While Conservative politicians want to allow dangerous weapons back into our communities, we're capping handgun ownership and moving Canada forward.
Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen
Mr.
Nicola.
Speaker, with today's interest rate hike, more and more households will have less to pay for rising fuel and grocery costs. Other G7 countries are trying to help with skyrocketing gas prices, but this Prime Minister is making it worse. His big spending has been called inflationary by the parliamentary budget officer, and his carbon tax has been called inflationary by the Governor of the Bank of Canada. Conservatives have proposed a temporary cut to the GST at the pumps to help Canadians. Will the Prime Minister finally quit his worn-out talking points and finally give the middle class and those striving to join it a break?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite well knows, but will not share with his constituents or any Canadians, the price on pollution actually returns more money to the average Canadian family than it costs them in the places where it's brought in. We're talking about over $1,000 a year for families in Saskatchewan and Alberta, 800 or so in Manitoba. We will continue to make sure we are supporting Canadians even as we move beyond our reliance on fossil fuels. This is something we know the world is asking for, Canadians are asking for, and we are leading on despite Conservatives.
The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Inflation is always someone else's problem to solve, except this Prime Minister. And leadership, Mr. Speaker, is everything. Germany has given $16 billion break on fuel taxes. The United States has opened up a strategic reserve. This Prime Minister has asked Canadians to forgive him for not thinking about monetary policy, but inflation is hitting them hard, and we are seeing zero leadership from this Prime Minister. Conservatives aren't asking the Prime Minister to pay for his own meals, to pay for his own gas, to pay for his own housing. Will he act today and give Canadians a break at the pumps so that they can pay for theirs?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know this current challenges around cost of living are hitting Canadian families hard, which is why we're continuing to step up on supports for them, whether it's supports for seniors, whether it's supports for families with increases linked to inflation of the Canada Child Benefit, whether it's moving forward on historic childcare deals that are saving Canadians, families across the country, thousands of dollars this year because of reduced costs. We are going to continue to support Canadians during this difficult time because we know they need it.
Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's goal to make everything more expensive is punishing Canadians at the grocery store. My constituency survey on inflationary grocery prices had this response from a resident. When is it going to stop? How much more do you think people can afford to spend on a set income? Another said, with the cost of food now so high, they can't afford medicine anymore. When is this Prime Minister going to wake up to how his Made in Canada inflation is putting basic necessities out of the reach of so many people?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that global inflation caused first by the pandemic and second by Vladimir Putin's illegal war in Ukraine is putting pressures on families, including with high gas prices. Canadians deserve support, which is what we're giving, but instead, the Conservative Party has opposed policies that put money back into Canadians' pockets. They voted against cutting taxes for the middle class. They voted against cutting childcare fees in half this year, and they voted against more support for families, for seniors, for students. They're also opposing our price on pollution, which means they're opposing giving more money to 8 out of 10 Canadian families. We will be...
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly sad that the Prime Minister is so out of touch with what people are going through. But it's not only individuals, it's small businesses as well. The total number of insolvencies in Canada, March 2022 compared to March 2021, was 33.1%. The Liberals' comments that business is back to pre-pandemic levels and that it's all sunny ways for everyone is false. When will the Prime Minister just acknowledge everything is more expensive, people are struggling, he blames everything on everyone else, and he really has no solutions?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, during the past 2 years of the pandemic, we were there for small businesses with help in the way of CEBA loans, in the way of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, direct support for families, and we were able to continue to ensure that small businesses would be able to hold through the darkest times of this pandemic. Now, unfortunately, this pandemic continues, and with it, we see record inflation around the world. We see rise in the cost of fuel and groceries. That's why we continue to be there to support support families who are squeezed by this, by investing in them, by making sure we're making the kinds of investments that support them without adding further inflationary pressures. That's what we will continue to do.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, yesterday, the Prime Minister refused to grant Quebec the immigration powers it's requesting. Why? Because he says the protection of French and Francophone immigration is very important. Duh, Mr. Speaker. Of course it's important, and that's why Quebec wants to be in charge of its own immigration. Protecting French and Francophone immigration is the future of Quebec as a nation where the common and official language is French. Seriously, is there anyone who thinks the federal government can do a better job than Quebec at ensuring this protection? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, as a Quebecer, I know that the federal government has an important role to play to protect French, not just in Quebec, but across the country. And that is why, for these countries across Canada, these official language minority communities, it's for them that we're going to continue to ensure Francophone immigration across the country. And in Quebec, we're very pleased to be working hand in hand with the Quebec government to increase Francophone immigration, if that's what they want. We're here to work in partnership with them. We're here to be partners to protect French and to increase the population of Quebec. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Okay, so let's sum up. The Prime Minister says that he's going to challenge Bill 21 because Canada should be able to impose its own vision of state secularism on Quebec. He says he wants to limit the scope of the notwithstanding clause to make very sure that Quebecers cannot pass laws that might displease Canada. And now he says that Quebec will never be granted the immigration powers it's calling for so it can better integrate newcomers. So now what does the Prime Minister say to Quebecers who want to make their own democratic choices? Choose independence? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I think, indeed, my colleague from the Bloc Québécois has skipped a step. All Quebecers are also Canadians, and as the Prime Minister of all Canadians, I am responsible for ensuring that the fundamental laws for all Canadians are protected, and that's what I'm always going to do, and also realizing that protecting my beautiful French language is at the heart of our priorities as a government and of mine as a Quebecer. So yes, we're going to take responsibility to ensure that all of these Quebecers who are all Canadians are protected in their fundamental rights.
The Heritage Minister wasn't able to answer any of my questions on Monday, so I'm hoping perhaps the Prime Minister might be able to assist today. Now, the Heritage Minister has claimed repeatedly that Bill C-11 doesn't capture user-generated content. But the chair of the CRTC, Mr. Scott, has said yes, in fact, user-generated content is captured within Bill C-11. Both of these men cannot be correct. And so I'm wondering if the Prime Minister can perhaps clarify for the sake of Canadians who are watching today, should they believe his minister or should they believe the chair of the CRTC?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have been very clear. Bill C-11 applies to platforms, not to users.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, in my riding, I have two amazing online content creators. Julia Westland and David Michaud have millions of viewers on YouTube, and they are world famous. Their art is their livelihood. But under Bill C-11, the CRTC could regulate their content and therefore have major impacts on their source of income. Will the Prime Minister guarantee that user-generated content on social media, like that of Julie and David, is exempt? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker. I am very pleased to be able to underscore the work of Julia and David and to say that their content will be protected. We are there to ensure that platforms protect Canadian content, but user-generated content, our users will be supported, and that's what the Conservatives still don't get. We, on this side of the House, we are always going to protect creators and artists. The Conservatives, we know what their story is. The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, it's not because the Prime Minister says something that it's true. What is written in the bill clearly is that the CRTC could regulate all content that generates income directly or indirectly, like artists who don't get subsidies and who want to live from their art. So a number of experts, not conservatives, experts in the field, have raised red flags in committee, and I'm going to repeat my question. It's very simple. Will he exempt all creators, all users on social media from Bill C-11, yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, yes. Creators, users, these individual people are protected under the bill. We are targeting platforms because we know full well, if we remember, for example, we were able to protect Quebec and Canadian culture by focusing on access to Canadian creators, whether it be radio, TV, or whether it be now on internet. We want to ensure that Canadian creators can be viewed, listened, and appreciated, and that is exactly what Bill C-11 does, and that's what the Conservatives continue to fail to understand. The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the summer coming, people from the world over are starting to plan their summer vacations, and as you know, with the easing of border measures, Canada is ready to welcome the world. Can the Prime Minister tell us what the government is doing to promote Canada on the international stage so that people can take advantage of our country from coast to coast to coast? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Alfred Pellan for his question and his diligent work. These past 2 years have been extremely difficult for the tourism sector. During this National Tourism Week, I would like to thank all of the tourism industry for its resilience and its promotion of Canada the world over, whether it be dancing to music at the Montreal Jazz Festival or observing beluga whales in Churchill. Let's make Canada a main tourist destination of people the world over.
No. Nothing says Happy Tourism Week like the arbitrary, unjustified extension of the restrictions and mandates in Canada's airports. Airports, airlines, chambers of commerce, health experts all called for an end to mandates, and this week, even members of the minister's own caucus said that these restrictions don't make sense anymore. His response? He doubled down. What more will it take for him to finally do the right thing, do his job, clear the backlogs in our airport, and give Canadians their rights back?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I wish we were able, like the Conservatives think we are, to simply wish away a pandemic, to wish away the thousands of deaths, to wish away the people dying every day, continued in this pandemic. Yes, we all want it to be over, but the best way to make sure that it's over.
Are we ready? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the Conservatives in denial about the reality of this pandemic. We continue to have a pandemic in this country. We continue to need to take measures to keep Canadians safe, and we will continue to be informed by the best public health advice and the advice of experts to get us through this. We know that Canada was able to do the right things across the country to minimize the impacts of the pandemic, both on Canadians and on our economy. We will continue to make sure we're putting the health of Canadians and the health of our economy first and foremost, because nobody wants another wave of this COVID-19.
Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, nearly 38,000 people participated in a Twitter poll posted by this government, but PHAC says 33,000 of them got the answer wrong. So it seems like this government has done a terrible job of keeping Canadians informed. Now, the Prime Minister has extended his punishing mandates for another month. So let's give him a chance to provide Canadians with some information, some facts. For how many more months will this Prime Minister extend his unscientific mandates?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, no one knows how long this pandemic is going to last, but I can tell you, even though the Conservatives seem to think it's over already, it is not. And we will continue to make sure we're putting first and foremost the protection of Canadians, their safety, their well-being, and the safety and reliability of their jobs and their futures. We have done that every step of the way, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to be informed by science, not by the barking of Conservative oppositions.
That's it. Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
The Prime Minister has changed his story so many times and moved the goalposts so many times, he refuses to answer a simple question. Millions of Canadians have lost their jobs and can't travel across the country because this Prime Minister chooses to divide, wedge, and stigmatize. Canadians deserve leadership, not ideology. So when will this Prime Minister finally drop the divisive politics and end the mandates?
Yeah. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the Conservatives refusing to remember that we actually had a very important election last year on the question of mandates, on the question of protections for Canadians. And they lost that election. Overwhelmingly, Canadians supported moving forward with vaccination mandates to keep Canadians safe. Now, unfortunately, they're stuck on the wrong side of things, but we continue to know putting science first, putting vaccinations first, actually matters most to keep Canadians safe and to keep our economy going well. That is what we will continue to do.
Now we're getting close to the end, and I know everybody's getting excited, so I just want to remind everyone, and especially the ones with the loud voices who really carry well, I can hear you, and some of you don't have a mask on, so I can actually see your lips moving. I know who you are. The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, British Columbia has been the epicenter for the overdose crisis for the past several years, and the increasingly toxic drug supply has exacerbated an already heartbreaking loss of life. In BC alone, there were an average of 5 deaths per day in the month of March alone, sending shockwaves of grief that ripple through families and communities. Can the Prime Minister please update this House on what our government is doing to turn the tide on the overdose and toxic drug supply crisis to save lives and to create a brighter future for communities in my province and right across the country?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country for his question and his incredibly hard work on this file and others. We're taking concrete action to tackle the opioid epidemic, including by announcing the approval of BC's proposal to decriminalize personal possession of certain small amounts. We will work in partnership with BC through their comprehensive monitoring and evaluation strategy to address both public health and public safety. Our approach is supporting community-led solutions to reduce harm, treat addiction, and prevent overdose.
Member for Port Moody, Quilquitlam.
So nice to see you back in the chair, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Liberals said they would move ahead with a disability benefit bill. People with disabilities deserve meaningful support from this government, and they have made it clear that the last bill was not good enough. Any new legislation must spell out comprehensive support. It cannot leave people behind. People living with disabilities have been waiting over a year for better. Will the Prime Minister promise that any new legislation will actually lift Canadians with disabilities out of poverty?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'm always pleased to see members of the NDP asking about this file. It's one that we take extraordinarily seriously and have continued to lead on every step of the way, including through the difficult times of the pandemic, by being there for Canadians living with disabilities. That's why we're very pleased to be moving forward to reintroduce the Canada Disabilities legislation. We know that support for people with disabilities is extremely important, but we also know that getting it right really matters. Nothing about people with disabilities without Canadians with disabilities, and that's why we will be working with the community to make sure we're getting it right.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this is it.
the Prime Minister's last opportunity before we vote on Bill C-216. A national crisis requires federal leadership. There are moms like Irene and Angela with us today among the tens of thousands across the country who've lost loved ones to a poisoned drug supply. The Prime Minister can put people's lives ahead of politics. He can turn around right now and give his caucus permission to support having expert input at committee. Will he do it?
You're right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are acting to keep Canadians safe. We've moved forward with a proposal working in hand with the British Columbian government to make sure that as we move forward, people have the supports in their community, in the local health system. We need a wraparound approach which BC is leading on, and we are very pleased to work with them, and we look forward to working with any other jurisdiction that wants to take on this responsible approach that the British Columbia NDP government has led with. We stand with them, and we thank them for their leadership as we move forward.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. The honourable member for Hull-Aylmer is rising on a point of order.
Speaker, during question period, I and a number on this side of the House heard the member from Kildonan St. Paul make an intemperate, if not incendiary, remark in response to an answer the Prime Minister was making with regard to the over-incarceration of Indigenous peoples and Black Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that this member will not want those remarks to stand unanswered. So I ask that you offer her the opportunity to withdraw those remarks or to significantly clarify them to the House.
The member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if he's referring to my question, or so maybe he can clarify.
The honourable member for Hull-Aylmer.
PMO didn't tell me. Mr. Speaker, I'm very reluctant to repeat those comments because they were so incendiary and intemperate. If I may, Mr. Speaker, I might ask you to review Hansard and to review the comments that I'm certain that our reporters had heard. But, Mr. Speaker, to clarify for her, to answer her question, it was not a statement that she made in a question. It was not a question that she posed to the Prime Minister. Rather, it was a statement that she was made while the Prime Minister was answering.
If it's okay with the House, what I will do, or what we will do, is we will revise the language and then come back to the House should something arise from that. Very good. It being 3:18, pursuant to order made on Thursday, November 25th, 2021, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion at second reading stage of Bill S-211 under private members' business. Call in the members.
The question is the following one.
Mr. McKay, Scarborough-Guildwood, seconded by Mr. Pulowski, moved that Bill S-211, an act to enact the Fighting Against Forced Labor and Child Labor in Supply Chains Act and to amend the customs tariff, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. La période.
The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started, and the House will now proceed to the vote.
We will start with the sponsor of the item.
Mr. McKay.
we'll proceed to members participating in person. All those on my right in favor of the motion will please rise.